Good morning to all of you early birds. I'm delighted to be welcoming you here today for this session dedicated to the Industrial Renaissance. We at the Circle des Économistes can innovate the whole time. We've got two plenary meetings going on at the same time this morning, which is quite unusual and incongruous, if I may say so. But we're just trying to drive competition here, and our goal here is to be the best of the two plenaries. And we have all of the best cards up our sleeve out of these two plenary sessions. We've got Heather Boucher, who is he's a chief economist and also an advisor at the White House, also representing Invest in America. Please give her a round of applause. We've got Valérie Rabault, who's an economist and a politician, and she used to be the rapporteur for the budget, and she's currently in position at the National Assembly here in France. We have four industrialists with us. Four of them represent about 150 billion euros in turnover. We've got two CEOs, Benoît Petier of Air Liquide and Ross McInnes, the chairman of the board of Safran. And we've got two general managers, two CEOs, Benoît Bazin, Saint-Gobain, and Paul Hudson for the company Sanofi. And, of course, I'm now going to hand the floor to our representative of the Cercle des Économistes, Marie-Françoise Renard. It's down to you to kick the ball for the very first time. Well, this is very inspiring to be here at the meeting today, and we're all thrilled that there is some industrial renaissance ahead of us. So I've not got very much time. I'm going to make three comments only. Firstly, the disindustrialization has been selected after the oil shock with competition from Southeast Asian companies. The idea that that we should leave certain responsibilities to other companies and we could keep hold of the services in our own land. Then from the 1980s, French capitalism became more financial. That had a very major impact on the disindustrialization of the country. Second comment. So why should industry regain a central role? Well, the illusion of a post-industrial country full of services disappeared because we've got a lot of unemployment and dependency on other countries. So why should we reindustrialize? Firstly, because industry generates more external positivity than farming, for example. It is a sector which carries out the most R&D, and industry plays a central role in our position with regards to the outside world. We've seen that in terms of dependency on strategic products. It's a matter of industrial sovereignty. And as everyone knows, we have a structural commercial deficit, which is compensated elsewhere, but it is nevertheless quite important. Third point. So how can we reverse the trend? This is a complex long-term plan. First of all, we have to integrate environmental considerations into the production process. Secondly, we have to reconcile strategic dependence with our position in the value chain. And thirdly, we have to take into account the territorial notion of industrial activity. These three objectives are interconnected and interdependent. They can lead to the creation of ecosystems that reconcile economic, society, and the environment. And it also means that we can give a central role to industrial policy, which has been decried and partially abandoned at that very time when emerging countries are thriving because of their industrial policies. Well, thank you very much for that brief and rapid introduction. I'm now going to hand the floor over to Benoît Bazin from Saint-Gobain. So yes, industrial renaissance is an interesting subject, of course. We've got an hour to talk about this. And you have said that this question goes beyond the question of industry. Yes, I think we have no choice about this. We have to engage in an industrial renaissance for several reasons, and I'm going to share my reasons why. The first one has been evoked: unemployment. If you generate industry, you generate jobs throughout the land, whereas other economic activities are focused in certain major cities, for example, whereas industry can help with town planning, for example. And in terms of sovereignty and autonomy, not only industrial sovereignty, but sovereignty in the most basic interpretation of the term for a country. We know that there's a certain military undercurrent here in Europe at the time being. And also innovation, all of the challenges which we have ahead of us, healthcare, climate, demographics, they can only be solved through innovation. And it is industry which will drive innovation to answer these, to rise to these challenges in the future. And I would also say, I would look even further than talking about the economics of the thing. In terms of sociology, for example, industry is one of the best platforms for moving up the social ladder. You can start off on the factory floor, become a supervisor, and train to be an engineer and be at the head of an industry. So our middle classes here are being destroyed, and we are now destroying these moderate political parties which are the foundation of our society. I think industry, and we'll hear about what's happened in the United States in terms of globalization, that has led to all kinds of extremes in some countries. So even in political terms, industrialization is very important to maintain the middle classes and the political survival in different countries. So that is why we do not have a choice about it. We have to reindustrialize France. We have very many plus points. We are geographically well situated in Europe, and we have recently recreated industrial jobs thanks to a very proactive approach in politics over recent years. Gradually, industry is becoming positive. That being said, we do have some huge hurdles to overcome. We really need to speed things up, and we have to shift up a gear. We need to ramp things up. And we need to have a better framework for competition in industry. So I would turn towards the public authorities here. We need a framework which is very competitive in terms of education. If we stop investing in education, then education will lag behind here in France. Sciences, maths, we will not have any engineers at all of the big engineering companies. So it's really important, education. But in the Biden plan, there's been a huge chapter on the STEMs. So we really have to, for industry, invest in science in France. Secondly, innovation, R&D. France has invested 2.5% of its GDP. We need more efforts in research and development, given the challenges that are waiting for us today and in the future, and to escape out of this notion of cost competitivity. Whether you make your T-shirts in France or in Cambodia, it depends whether you're going to invest in the new technologies of tomorrow. We are in competition with China, the States, with added value and new technologies. So we need to innovate, we need to educate, and that means that we will share knowledge and share value. And that is the way that we need to go. Third subject, mobility. In terms of ports, airports, motorways. Saint-Gobain is a company which goes to collect its raw materials in Amsterdam or Antwerp because they are competitive ports. We do not have any competitive ports in France. The biggest port in France is Marseille. We do have ports in Le Havre and other places in the north, but they're not competitive. And another important subject is energy. When you talk about green industry, the only question that is important to an industrialist when you're talking about the next 3 decades is the availability in good cost and good proportions of energy. So what will decarbonated electricity look like in France in 2025? We need to know, we need to have visibility for the next 25 years. We have the first decarbonated factory in Norway because we live next door. It is sited next to a Ford. In Canada also we have decarbonated energy because of the geography there. We need green energy in Europe. It's vital. We don't have any signals on that subject. And this is the framework which I've just described, education, innovation, mobility and energy, is absolutely vital, and it has to be on a European scale. I am absolutely confident in this. We can do this, but we do need a very competitive framework. We don't need not to be told what colour we need to paint things or anything, but European competitivity needs to be based on this framework which I have just described. Would you say that industrial renaissance today has already been started here in France? Are we on the way up? Are we bouncing back? Yes, I would say that is the case. We've created 50 or 60,000 industrial jobs, but there are many jobs at risk if electricity remains expensive in Europe. So the picture is more positive. We have recreated factories. Our country is at work, but it's very fragile. And we really do have to change the paradigm. And we have to have long-term stability for those subjects. Benoît Gauthier, would you say that this renaissance is just at its very, very earliest stages? Benoît Potier? Hello, welcome to everybody. Before answering your question, I would like to make two observations. The share of industry in Europe, or rather in France, has been going down since the 70s. We were at 20%, now we're only at 13% of our GDP. That means that here, before us, we see industry has gone down. The undercurrent is continuing, and it's only just starting to stabilize. So you've answered my question, in fact. No, I was just talking about disindustrialization. Now let's talk about reindustrialization. So, but before I do, I just want to say that when we're talking about industry, we are talking of many, many types of different industries in different sectors. Let me just give you an illustration. We know what heavy industry is, light industries. We've got production, transformation industries, we've got technological industries, and the industry of services. And every time we know that they're all very different. When you talk about business sectors, it's the same thing. We've got many, many different sectors represented here in this room. Sectors can be metal, chemistry, or glass, rubber, paper, pharmaceuticals, etc. And what we have to realize, when we talk about reindustrialization, you have to have a sector-by-sector approach, because it's by sector that we will manage to reindustrialize. Reindustrialization means reconstructing. We have to start from what the image is today and imagine how we can construct on that. So up until now, in a globalized system, we industrialists have been thinking in terms of economic optimums. We want to produce where it costs least to produce. We try to invent how products could be moved from one country to another. We did our calculations, and to serve a market, we developed a chain, the most competitive chain possible. But it was an economic mindset. Today, we're talking about energy, and I would like to come back on that point. It is so important. The energy situation has been completely overturned. So this economic optimum which we created has also been overturned. We need to reconstruct that. So fundamentally, we need to take into account energy policies in the way that we produce. Are we, or can we use low carbon, renewables? Where are we going to find that clean energy? And that is what is very at the heart of this whole debate. Second big upheaval, the environment. We can no longer design industry without taking the environment into account. Environmental policy is so important. You can ask any business that you want. Here in Aix, you can ask the businesses, have you taken any commitments for 2025? They will all say yes. We all have taken commitments, very major commitments, to be carbon neutral by 2025. So we all have an environmental component. And the third point is sovereignty. So we used to have access to all of our raw materials all over the world. Today, that is no longer the case. So geopolitics have to play a role in industry. So we were talking about the economy in the past. Now we're talking about energy, the environment, and sovereignty. You see that the equation has completely been changed. It's become more complicated. We need to reconstruct industry and take all of those elements into account. So what are our strong points? What are our hurdles? Let me come back to what Benoît said a moment ago. We in France, as in Europe, can innovate. We have capacity there. We've got training, wonderful infrastructures, we've got financial resources, we've got the single market, we've got Europe in many of our countries, and so we can construct. And this is our problem I'm coming to now. The domestic market is fragmented. There is a total lack of energy policy in Europe, and I really do want to underline the fact that industry needs energy. We have to construct that European energy policy, and regulations are excessive. and the decision-making process is very complex. So that is Europe, our Europe. If we're not satisfied with what we've got, then we have to roll up our sleeves and change it. In the industrial field, we have noted that in terms of energy and the environment, we really do have to change the contours. And in the backdrop, we see there's a kind of mistrust which has settled in between those who make the rules and those who apply the rules, i.e., in Europe, we're talking about the European Commission and industries. And I think that this really is a hurdle for everybody. We, in order to reconstruct industry, we need more room for maneuver. We need more freedom. Well, thank you very much. We have to move forward. I'm going to move on to Valérie Rabault and ask about her point of view as a politician. You're not in the majority party. You're part of the NUPES, the left-wing party, or up until today, is that right? Perhaps you've changed your mind over the last couple of weeks? I know that relations are rather tricky between the parties. But have you noted that there is industrial renaissance there? Do you have a positive outlook on the way the government, led by Emmanuel Macron, has tried to start up this reindustrialization? First of all, hello, everybody. If there is renaissance, that means that there has been some kind of death or a decline, let's say it's less brutal. Since the year 2000, the GDP, the share represented by industry, has gone from 18 to 16%. Not a huge drop, but it is a drop. Among the rich countries, France is the country where that decline has been the biggest. We've shifted from 15% of GDP in 2000 to 9% for industry, manufacturing industry. We're not even at 10%. And that is an absolutely exception in all of the richest countries in the planet. So, faced with this, is there a renaissance? I would like to say yes, and I would like to say that the starting point is this ecological realization, because there are not two solutions for ecology. Either we do negative growth, or we go for industry, an industry that can invent new mechanisms to produce, which will ensure that we have an ecological revolution. So either it's negative growth or it's industry. You have to choose which avenue you want to take, and I obviously choose industry. So who blew the starting whistle? Well, Heather is here, so I could say it's the United States with the Biden plan, the IRA. And this Inflation Reduction Act has has caused debate because it wanted to reduce inflation, and I'm sure Heather will talk about this in a moment. But as we stand today, over 40% of the American population is aware of what this IRA is. I would like you to ask that same question in France and in Europe, to see if they're aware of the European plans. And if we reached 10%, that would be a pleasant surprise. So we've got this an industrial renaissance needs the populations. That means we need to be methodological about it, and we need to put the resources in it. What kind of resources are we putting into this renaissance? I work at the Parliament, so I can talk about this. Is France in the race? Well, there's a big question mark hanging over this. There are three levers. First of all, industrial renaissance opens the door to competition within Europe. So rather than working together, we are competing against one another. So France has there is a lot of money at stake here. The relationship is 1 to, and the ratios vary. So yes, there are problems of public finance, and I would like to commend Claude Reynaud, who is in charge of the Finance Committee. We do have problems in finances, so it's not a level playing field. When we see all of the different support that is given to industry, we are entering into competition between ourselves, and we will not survive in Europe if we continue to have this battle between the countries. Second chapter. This support, or these main guidelines, have to be carefully thought about. Let's talk about Germany. Germany has 5 times more than France in terms of money earmarked for energy and ecological evolution. If we do not have precise targeting, we will not reach that efficient yield point, a third chapter, which has already been mentioned by Benoit this morning, and this is scientific training. I'm going to take another comparison. In Germany, you've got 20% of students who study technology and engineering. In France, 5% less, and the figures keep going down. So we have to be aware of all this. We are not aware of this properly yet, and until we are, we will not be in that race towards industrial renaissance. And in terms of project steering, in France, we love drawing up plans, etc. The problem is we never see them through. We never consolidate our monitoring of these projects. In Paris, we talk about these orange guidebooks. These are summary documents, very complete. You've got the city's policies, you've got teaching, you've got all kinds of things, but you don't have anything on industry. There's not a chapter on industry. Industry is disseminated. Its support is disseminated. In 2022, the Court of Accounts identified 2,100 different measures for support to industry. How on earth do you expect industrialists to pick their way through that maze? It is impossible. Therefore, we realize that these subsidies are underused and they're not being as efficient as they should have in terms of the public money which is put on the table. So we need to have a consolidated view so that everyone knows what's going on. We need to have more scientific education, and we are really lagging behind the field, so a lot of ground has to be made up. Then we need to have a budgetary plan of support, which means that we can catch up with our European partners.
Thanks a lot. You've talked about Germany, and you've talked about the high amounts of money. So it was a negative position against Europe, so a kind of selfish attitude by Germany. But Germany has a long industrial tradition, and this is something that we know very well. Have a look at the companies in Germany. Is there a cultural issue between France and Germany regarding industrial renaissance? How can I put it? So Germany has been supporting its industry, and it will pull out all the stops to support its industry. Are we within the same rationale? I'm not quite sure. So Ross McInnes, what is your take on that? Are we in the same momentum? Do you think that France supports enough its industry? Is industrial renaissance in the pipeline? Allow me to qualify what has been said. Following the introduction of this seminar, financialization of French capitalism is one of the causes of deindustrialization. I don't think so. Industrial companies have been subjected to high levels of taxes to the benefit of the welfare state. So financialization was rife everywhere. So tax and regulatory stability, neutrality of the state in terms of technological choices, preservation of the benefits of the single market, and of course, we are not going to enter into a crazy race, not to adopt the carbon adjustment mechanism as it is today. And Benoit has talked about that, and visibility of energy costs. So regulatory stability. We shouldn't change this here. Not to revisit the labor market reforms that have been undertaken since 2015 to reduce production taxes, and of course we've talked about education, to further the measures in order to beef up the links between professional schools and companies. So of course the national education system should play a key role. So we need to use tax credits for companies. So state neutrality, this is something that we've heard regarding the technological choices. So the state is not the best strategist in this field. So I prefer a state that is like a gardener. So I've talked about state subsidies. So people will get to the 2,100 counters, economic counters, when they are open. The US decided to breach the rules of the WTO. So we in Europe, are we going to put in jeopardy the benefits of a single market? So for us, the industrialists, it's a dilemma. Charles Péguy said that the disciples of Kant have pure hands, but they don't have hands. But they should turn to these 2,100 economic counters. The removal of the free quotas is a poison. We will be penalized with imports of semi-finished products and staple products, and we don't have enough reliable data. The exports will be penalized because the carbon tax will be implemented without any compensation. So the Americans are subsidizing, and Europe will increase taxes. I'm not going to revisit the cost of energy issue because visibility is pivotal. So, Nicolas, to answer your question, Renaissance, after the Middle Ages, why not? But I look forward to the century of enlightenment. Thank you, Ross McInnes. You said that the state shouldn't step in the choice of technologies. So, Benoît Bazin and Benoît Potier, do you agree with that stance? Something that I touched upon already. So we need to define a stable framework that is competitive. And of course, the industrialists, should have a role to play, taking into account the research capacities, the competitive edge, and the profitability mechanisms. There will be failures, there will be successes. This is what the United States have done. It's pragmatic, it's more efficient. Basically, you are choosing a technology, and then 20 years after, you do realize that it's not the right technology. So we need to work on the framework. Benoît Potier, that's very important what you've said. So technological neutrality means that industrialists will have some free way. They will be able to choose. So ERA in the US, your carbon intensity should be low. What you produce should be made with as little carbon as possible. And in Europe, if you don't use this technology, it won't work. If you don't have these means to produce, you won't get tax credits. It means that the room for maneuver has been lessened, so the technologies cannot develop and the markets cannot transform, and you put in jeopardy industrialization. So, of course, I do agree with you. ERA has said production in the United States. So production in Europe, should be reinforced. We'll be talking about that. Paul Hudson, you are the Chief Executive Officer of Sanofi, at the helm of an industry that is at the heart of sovereignty. The word sovereignty has been pronounced repeatedly. So there's a topic that is key for the French state. We need to reconquer sovereignty, and we need to produce and organize industrial renaissance in France, and the pharmaceutical industry has been instrumental in that framework. So what has happened in France, is it in line with the way you want to manage your company and develop your company?
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. It's somewhat astonishing that we're talking about an industrial renaissance and we've made it this far across the podium without a discussion on health. I think Benoît kicked us off talking about education as a relevant driver. For as long as I can remember, healthy environments and economies have been a combination of health and education. Now, France, I can tell you personally, has prioritized health and also prioritized health sovereignty. We'll talk about that in a second. Europe, sadly, has not. Health is not on the agenda in Europe. Pharmaceuticals, biotech, not on the agenda in Europe. For the first time this year, China will produce more new important clinical breakthroughs than the whole of Europe combined. China will produce more STEM graduates than Europe combined. China will start more biotechs than Europe combined. President Macron, I think, has recognized for some time that you really do have to be together in Europe to compete. France is an incredible country, but France can't take on the US and China single-handedly. Let me give you an example about medicines. You know, we have had shortages of medicines as an industry in many parts of Europe, particularly in the pandemic. What has happened over the last 10 years, governments have put medicines out for tender, out for auction, particularly essential medicines, medicines that many millions of people rely on. And then they've demanded the lowest prices possible. Inevitably, they want us to pay, to charge a price less than it costs to make the medicine. In which case, because standards and quality standards and labor standards in Europe are high, the manufacture, not by us, but by other people, moves to China and India. It's an old path that many have followed. As soon as those organizations in China and India, those companies, have to invest capital in modernizing their facilities, they stop and they move on to another project. Suddenly there is no supply of an essential medicine in Europe. And then governments call me and can call me personally and say, why are you not supplying the medicine? I say, because you want us to charge a price lower than it costs to make. It's very difficult to do that. And then, of course, the companies come under some tension and some visibility on these things. If you really believe in sovereignty, really believe, you don't panic and at the end try and build another facility. It takes 5 years to make a factory, to calibrate it and use it to make a medicine because of the standards. 5 years. So if we start today to build a paracetamol factory, it'll be ready in 2029. So you can't have that agility on tap. So what really has to happen is that governments in Europe particularly need to think much earlier about how they make sure medicines and sovereignty are supported. Nobody's asking to make profit. We're asking to be at the table, to have some predictability, to make an investment so we can get there. I campaigned for almost 2 years to make health part of the IPCEI, a strategic imperative in Europe. There's no interest in Europe. Zero interest. So Europe's biotech scene will gradually recede unless somebody steps forward and does something significant about it. We'll play our part, because after all, we're a healthcare company. We'll do what's required, because we're in it to make people's lives better. But we'll do it despite the European approach and the lack of interest in health. I think beyond that, while we continue to innovate, the brilliant new medicines that we make inevitably will become the essential medicines of the future that governments won't want to pay for and will be manufactured in other countries. And then sovereignty will be at risk again. Maybe finally, on the decarbonization agenda, I think we're all working to a carbon neutral, a net zero target. We're proud of the work we're doing at Sanofi. But let's be really clear. Some of the investment in health is not just because pollution causes health issues. It's because if you don't address how healthcare is delivered, you create an issue with people's health. People think the environment creates health inequity. But let me give you a slightly different perspective. If you're a normal, healthy adult, however we define that these days, you'll create about 15 tons of carbon in your adult life. If you're pre-diabetic, not diabetic, if you change your lifestyle, you may not become diabetic, then if we intervene here, we will stop the inevitable decline towards you become diabetic, where you will create 45 tons of carbon. How healthcare is delivered, how it's given to you, how you drive to find a hospital, can't park, how the drug is manufactured, it all adds up to create 300% more carbon just because your lifestyle was not impacted early enough to avoid you becoming part of the problem and what you create. And if you forgive me just the last second, on the IRA, we all applaud the IRA for its single-mindedness, its visibility, the way that everybody knows it. It's very, very important. The devil, of course, is always in the detail. And for the healthcare industry, the IRA is a real challenge. It really does not foster innovation. It really rewards significant amounts of money going to middlemen and women, and sadly will lead to fewer breakthroughs in cancer over the next few years.
Merci beaucoup, Paul Hudson. Dr. Boucher, je disais, vous représentez ici l'administration Biden. Vous êtes...
So you represent the Biden administration. Heather, can you hear me? So you represent the Biden administration, and we are talking about industrial renaissance and the IRA. Maybe you can tell us what is at stake, what are the main figures regarding this huge plan that was launched by the Biden administration.
Apologies, I do not speak French, so I'll speak in English. Thank you. So I'll take just a couple of moments to talk about the IRA and give you some of the key statistics. So it's been so interesting to hear on this panel the importance of government thinking about how we are making strategic investments. And that is what the President Biden, has been focused on, making sure that the U.S. government is focused on the things that we need to build and make in the United States, the things that are important for our economic vitality, for our resiliency, and the things that are going to be strategically important over the long haul. And the priorities that we have set out are in innovative technologies and, of course, in clean energy. And that is the crux of what we've done in the Inflation Reduction Act. This is about a government-led, private sector-enabled set of policies to spur the transition, the movement to move away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy, and making those investments now so that we can push out that cost, push down those costs, push out that technology frontier, and bring things to commercialization at scale as quickly as possible. And we believe that that will lower costs, benefit countries around the world, and there's a lot of work that we have done throughout this to fulfill a set of the President's goals, to make sure that we are empowering and educating workers in the United States. We are front-loading this, making sure that we are making those investments in people, making sure that we are focused on a fair and open and competitive marketplace. We're shaping markets in order to foster competition, making sure that we are thinking about these questions of resiliency, and of course, working and partnering with our friends and allies around the world to make this happen, to bring everyone together. It's taken a while for the United States to provide that leadership on clean energy, and yet what we have done, historic as it is, and as everyone on this panel has talked about, the amount of money that we have invested in a piece of legislation that is supposed to last 10 years, but just to take the $1 figure, the $370 billion, that is on an annual basis about a tenth of what the world needs to invest in clean energy annually, every single year. So we've taken what we all feel like is a very huge step, and yet it's a drop in the bucket towards this technological change. So we're hoping by doing this that we'll be able to send this very strong demand signal to help guide industry. I want to make a few points on data and how we're doing it. So first, one of the things that we've seen is since the President has taken office, so not just since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a year and a half into office, we've seen $500 billion in private sector investment in semiconductors, clean energy, batteries around the United States. That is, obviously, it's more than the amount of the bill itself. Many of these firms, most of these firms have not received yet $1 of public funds. This is on the hope that they will be receiving these. But it's also about sending that very strong demand signal that this is where industry needs to go, that is a global question, and by us providing our leadership, we're trying to engage in that conversation. We have seen the United States over the course of the post-pandemic have the strongest economic recovery among the G7. We've grown, we continue to add jobs, we have an unemployment rate that is lower than it's been in 50 years, and it's been hovering at that level for almost many months now, almost a year, and yet our inflation, while high, has not been higher than our economic competitors. The key here is that the way that we've gone about this is setting out a set of policies to say these are the strategic investments, but we need to crowd in that private money. And so most of the investments are open in that they're tax credits that any firm can take advantage of. We are not dictating which technologies, for the most part, firms need to do, but really making sure that we are making those strategic investments in those strategic sectors. Let me end by noting that the United States has seen some of the highest economic inequality among our economic competitors over the past half century. And what that's meant in the United States is the top really pulling further and further apart from the middle and the bottom. This reindustrialization is a strategy to not only make sure, as so many of you were talking about, that we make things that are vital to our economic and national security, but that we are doing so in a way that will create good jobs and create a race to the top. For too long, the global trading schema has promoted a race to the bottom, and that needs to stop. It's not good for our economies, our societies, the health and welfare, and it's certainly not good for our democracies. So I think so far we have seen strong indications that that is working. It is crowding in investment and leading to the kinds of outcomes that we need to see not in the United States but in other countries as well.
Merci beaucoup. Juste une question.
Ross McInnes said earlier on that launching the IRA policy was a contradiction to the OMC rules, the World Trade Organization rules. Well,
I can't listen at the same time. So certainly, this is, the president, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, just gave a major speech a month or two ago in Washington on this very question. That we are rethinking our place in the global trading system. We are trying to make sure that what we're doing is fostering competitive markets, but making sure that it is fair, and making sure that it benefits our domestic economies. Again, the United States has seen that the effects of globalization have not been good for millions of Americans across the country. We've seen job losses that have devastated, particularly Midwestern and manufacturing communities. We have seen that we have been unable to deal with the damages that come with climate change. And so we need to rethink how we engage. The United States has not stepped away from our trading partners. Certainly our trade has continued. We continue to be out there trying to make sure that we are partnering in ways that will benefit. But refocusing that conversation on the race to the top. So when I think, for example, of the work that my colleagues on the international team have done around critical minerals, for example, making sure that these new that these goods that are going to be so important to clean energy, we have a new challenge, right? We are trying to move away from fossil fuels, move away from a world where trade is dependent on oil, into one where we're thinking about where are we going to get these minerals from around the world. We're setting up a new system. How do we make sure that the production of these, which can be so toxic to human life, to the environment, that we're creating a race to the top? The United States has been taking a leadership role on that, both in the EU and Japan and other countries, really trying to make sure that we are working together. So I think what you've seen is we are trying to reinvigorate our partnerships in a way that can be beneficial for our home countries, as well as abroad.
Oui, je suppose que vous comprenez que tous les chefs d'entreprise qui sont là et tous ceux...
All of the business leaders in the room here and those who've been speaking since the start of the program say that they are going to try and take advantage of it, but they do find it very aggressive towards France in particular and Europe.
So here's the thing. So many ways I could go on this, but let me... Our set of policies provide tax credits for countries, for companies that invest. Some of those credits have bonuses for domestic content. But let's be very, very clear that when you look at the details, the bonuses are a very small part of the overall credit. It's in some of the largest tax credits, it's a 10% bonus on top of a set of other kinds of tax credits that you can get, regardless of whether or not you source domestically. So that, I hear I understand the frustration, but when you actually look at the details, the extent to which the United States is subsidizing domestic industry is certainly not greater than what European countries do themselves, both in procurement and in the Buy America. We can get into some of the details. We don't have enough time to go through all of those, but I'm happy to talk to anyone after about that. But I think what is really important here, and that what we need to keep front and center, is that the most important thing that we all need to do for our economies, for our national and economic security, is to foster that clean energy transition. And that is what we are doing. We are making sure that we are investing. We're one of the richest countries of the world. We have made this significant investment in propelling that industry forward, sending that strong signal, and making it possible for industry to thrive, making it possible for us to get along that innovation to commercialization pipeline, to produce at scale the kinds of technologies we need to move away from fossil fuels so that we do not continue to see the rise in climate damages. The only way to get through the climate change challenge is to find new sources of energy, which is why we are making those investments.
Okay, how long is it to build a new plant on average? How long is it to build a new plant? In factory, in automotive industry, in a factory.
Well, so, I mean, we are seeing these investments starting up right now all over the United States, certainly in batteries, in solar, in automobiles, in electric vehicles, happening right now. But we are also seeing this happening in other countries. Let's remember, I think I already said this, but if I didn't, let me just repeat again, the amount of money that we're investing over 10 years is only a tenth of what we need to be investing on an annual basis. So in order to solve this problem, we know that we need hundreds of billions of dollars in annual investment in clean energy technologies to get these at scale, not just for our countries, not just for Europe, but of course to make these technologies cheaper so that we can make sure that countries all around the world can have access to these kinds of technologies.
Merci beaucoup. C'est un sujet qu'on a...
Thank you very much. This is a subject we've just brushed upon. We haven't really gone into it in depth, but in France, building a plant is very, very difficult because there's usually a lot of opposition because it's not in my backyard kind of thing. And also because France is a country where the standards, the administration are so dense, it takes years. So how long would it take to build a Saint-Gobain factory? 3 to 5 years, I would say, depending on the situation. What we've just heard shows how practical and pragmatic the Americans are. And it gives us a bit of a kind of pinch, really, which is good for us. The second thing is we can hear the logic, this mindset of investing. There's that technological challenge of decarbonation. We need to, in France and in Europe, we need to invest, to have room for maneuver, to invest. And thirdly, the United States are no longer naive about China. They tax Chinese vehicles at 28%. In Europe, it's only 10%. We don't have any car manufacturers on the stage up here, but let's not be naive about this. If we're not careful, the Chinese cars will be flooding into our market. So that makes us Europeans also to face reality and to do what is better for the middle classes in Europe.
So I've tried to say it a bit earlier, maybe it didn't come across very well, but I think the French government has worked incredibly hard to make building plants possible. And not just any plants. We're building a site near Lyon that is perhaps going to be the most modern site in a pharmaceutical company anywhere in the world ever built. So this is state-of-the-art stuff. I find the government incredibly encouraging to set new standards both in the environment and to help bring highly skilled jobs to France. However, still remains, why is Europe not interested in health, its contribution to GDP, and the access to medicines? I'll leave you with one fact. In the 50% of the drugs, new drugs for cancer, for difficult diseases, 50% of the new drugs that are approved in Europe are not available for patients in Europe. Half. So if you've got a friend or relative with a disease and you're struggling, wondering why there is not an innovation, it's a little bit mind-blowing that there's such a lack of interest in providing innovation and budget for innovation in Europe.
Thank you. Valérie Rabault, vous êtes, je le rappelle, députée. Donc...
Valérie, you are an MP, so you represent a population in the Tarn and Garonne region. You, I'm sure, under quite a lot of pressure. As soon as there's an industrial project or a factory that wants to extend or a warehouse wants to extend, for example, I'm sure you suffer pressure when that happens. How do you manage that pressure of public opinion? And also, because they're part of your allies, how do you are in partnership with the Green Party, so how do you manage their pressure? Well, how do we manage local pressure? I think the elected representatives need to commit. Yes, I have had a case. Yes, this really is a hot topic on the table. Yes, there was a subject recently. There were oppositions to. There were appeals launched. Personally, my position is very firm. We support. Earlier on, we were talking about targets. Yes, you have to have two very clear targets. One, investment. And secondly, as has been clearly expressed, the return on investment for all of the citizens. So NU taxing, we talked about this Chinese cars, they're more heavily taxed in the States than in France. This is a very clear message which is sent out. And for the time being, we are not sending out those messages. So everybody has to be able to see things clearly. So you invest, value is created near my home. However, I must not I must face reality in this, and I must not allow the aggressive Chinese to muscle in. The United States have come up with an answer to that. They're much more offensive than we are, aggressive. Do you mean towards Europe or the public opinion? No, towards their public opinion. They're very, very offensive, more offensive than what we're doing in Europe and in France. Benoît Petier? I would say, I'm familiar with hydrogen. I'll talk about that. For 10 years, we fought to get the Americans interested in hydrogen. They were way behind, really behind. The World Council noted that the Americans were lagging behind. The Asians and the Europeans were ahead. The IRA has completely changed that. And the IRA has been really well done because investment credits, operational credits are in place. However, that is not the magic solution. Let's not imagine that the IRA is going to change everything and that we aren't able to do anything. I think there's this tax credit which can apply if such and such a criteria is met. So for hydrogen, for example, we could go to $3 per kilo of credit on the price, but that's 6 times 0.5. 6 times 0.5. You have to have 6 boxes that you have to tick before you can have that credit. As for authorizations, the American industrialists are saying that it takes 6 years in the States to get authorization to construct a plant, a factory, such as in California. I think that this awareness that we've got in Europe has changed the landscape, and we in Europe are managing to gain a little bit of leadership in relation to the United States. So Heather, would you like to come back for a final word?
A couple words on that. So certainly the issue of permitting is one that the Biden administration has been working on extensively. It requires congressional action, but we are working with our state and local partners on this. I think, too, sending the signal how urgent this is and creating more and more stakeholders in business community, in the private sector, civil society, that cares about getting things across the finish line because it is going to benefit their businesses and their communities is very important. And I think one of the things that's really important and that I think is an undercurrent in this reindustrialization conversation is that we're doing it because we want the industry, we want to be competitive, but we're also doing it because we believe that this will benefit people, workers, communities, the environment, and so we believe that that is good for our publics. And I think that's the piece that we just cannot lose sight of. In everything that we're doing in our industrial strategy, we're taking both a demand and a supply side approach, but making sure that the investments are happening in the communities where it matters. And I think that that is an undercurrent I just wanted to elevate.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Françoise. Il vous reste 1 minute.
1 minute, Marie-Françoise, to wrap up. Okay, my take-home message from this debate is the importance of systemic effect of industry. It's a social elevator. It helps people to improve their quality of life. So at the very beginning, I talked about positive externalization. We also have to talk about competition. And as an academic, I can only defend the importance of training, particularly scientific training and education, and R&D. And finally, the need for a competitive framework and for clear European policy, particularly in terms of energy. That's essential for businesses who need some visibility. And I'm going to give you a personal comment. I'm specialist in Chinese economy. I do not believe that there's any kind of naivety here. We have been managing opposing views, and we've often favored the short term as opposed to the long term. Well, thank you very much. We really have done the best of the two plenaries. There's no doubt about that. Thank you, Heather, for being here. The two Benoit, Valérie, everybody, Marie-France, thank you very much, everybody, for being here.